afternoon, distinguished guests, esteemed speakers and participants, both in person and online. It is my honor to welcome you to the Symposium on Climate and Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, organized by the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and ARISE UAE with the generous support of Shoba Realty and the Dubai Land Department. As we begin this vital symposium, I kindly ask you to your attention for a few house rules. Please ensure that all mobile phones are turned off or switched to silent mode. We encourage active participation, but please refrain this time to the Q&A segments of each one of the sessions. At the time of the Q&A, you can raise your hand, and then the moderator will allow you to speak, and some of my colleagues and myself will bring you a microphone. For the moderators and the panelists, we will have a clicker so that your presentation can be operated by yourself. Thank you for your cooperation. Now, to formally open our program, I am pleased to invite Mr. Sujit Mohanty, Chief of Intergovernmental Processes, Interagency Cooperation and Partnerships Branch at UNDRR. He will give us the introductory remarks. Sujit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric. So very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. It's really our pleasure to welcome you here, and thanks for your time to participate in this symposium of ARISE. So many of you, we know that you are from the private sector. Some are associated with the ARISE, but it would be good to give you a quick background of what is UNDRR and who we are and what is ARISE here. So UNDRR is the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is a United Nations department who are looking at disaster risk reduction issues. I'm trying to as simplify as possible for you to know, rather than using a lot of jargons and acronyms. So we are the UN member states met in 2015 to come up with a agreed upon a framework that is called Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030, and we are given the job of facilitating the implementation of that framework by our member states. So in doing so, the Sendai Framework very well articulates the need for engagement of private sector as a shared responsibility. The responsibility of reducing risk is not just with the governments, but is also with all of society. Engagement, and private sector is one of the critical player in this. And when we say private sector, the engagement in resilience, disaster risk reduction discussion is not only to provide external support, but to look at their own businesses, how they are being affected, how they can really make their own investment safer. So with that shared responsibility, ethos, we have been working closely with the private sector, and the initiative we are taking is called ARISE, the Private Sector Alliance for Disaster Resilient Societies, and we have been engaged since last 10 years from the beginning of the Sendai Framework. In UAE, ARISE in the UAE, ARISE is being implemented by our colleagues from UAE, and this is the UAE ARISE which is hosting this event as well. So I would like to also express our sincere thanks to UAE ARISE and Sobha Realty, which is part of UAE ARISE and supporting this event. So today we have come here with a focused discussion on resilient infrastructure and the issue of rising temperature and extreme heat. So we'll have two panel discussions today, and we have the pleasure of having our special representative of the Secretary General, Mr. Kamal Kishore, as well as the head of the UN in UAE, the UN Resident Coordinator, Ms. Beranger Boel, and our colleagues or the chair of the UAE Arise. So without taking much of time, we would like to really get into the discussion of how we make infrastructure resilient through engagement of private sector. And then I would like to now call upon our first speaker, Dr. Mohammed Al-Burai.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I have 2 speeches, but I may not use any one of them. We'll see how it goes. Thanks for the coming today to our event. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Vice President of the United Arab Emirates, Prime Minister, ruler of Dubai, always say the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I think we are at a crossroad where we have to create the future. Government alone cannot do it. Private sector should be there. Businesses should be there. Society should be there. Academia should be there. And we've been seeing a lot of success stories in different regions. And here in Dubai, we want to partner with all successful best examples and make sure that we integrate them in the way we're doing things. Your presence today reflects a shared commitment towards enhancing the resilience of our urban environment in the face of all the challenges. In the last April, we had one of the worst climate change impact here in Dubai. And from that time, we've seen a lot of interest in the work that we're doing. And that's why the real estate resilience tool that we launched in Dubai, and now it's going to be mandatory for companies working in the freehold to implement it on their buildings to make sure that we are ready for the future. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid always say, when he announced the $8 billion investment in a new sewerage system, that we're not just preparing Dubai to 10, 15 years from today, we're preparing Dubai to 100 years from today, and this is the future foresight. So Dubai is not just dedicated to shape a sustainable future, but also ensure that our infrastructure stands strong against all inevitable impacts of the climate change. So this is the vision we have, the $8 billion that have been recently announced, part of upgrading and transitioning our existing sewerage system is just one of the projects that City of Dubai is working on. So investing in the future is and always has been in the DNA of Dubai. So as UAE Arise, we're committed to this. We are the bridge between the private sector and government. We've been working closely with the government of Dubai, mainly Dan Department and Dubai Police, on institutionalizing the resilient tool. And this has been piloted in a couple of projects, and today we'll have some success stories. Our friends will tell us how this tool has been transformed into a technology solution. We tested it on horizontal, vertical communities. And actually, and Rima, I don't want to ruin your speech, but I know that the communities that has done that thing actually did a better job when we had the April floods. So without any taking more of your time, what I really hope after today's meeting is that this is not just the end of it. We shake hands, we build bridges, we work together to make sure that our cities are more resilient in the face of future climate change. Dubai success story and the resilience tool can be a great international story. We're willing to work with all the other cities who want to scale this solution along with the UNDRR. So thank you so much for your time and looking forward to a great event today. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Mohanty and Dr. Al-Burai, for the inspiring words and for setting today's agenda. It is my privilege now to invite His Excellency, Her Excellency, Berangere Bawel, United Nations Resident Coordinator for the UAE, to deliver welcome remarks. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My apologies, I still have a cold, so I'm trying to clear my voice. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, good afternoon. It's a great honor to join this gathering of leaders and innovators united by a shared commitment to building infrastructure that is resilient to climate change and disasters. I would like to extend a special welcome to His Excellency Kamal Kishore, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, and also extend my appreciation to his team that has been, I know, working very hard, and to Mr. Mahmoud Al-Burai, the Vice Chair of Arise UAE, also for organizing this important symposium. The need for resilient infrastructure has never been more urgent, and we have seen at the negotiation that recently concluded in Baku that still climate change and resilience is at the heart of the world's agenda. According to the OECD, half of the infrastructure required by 2050 have yet to be built. And the Global Commission on Adaptation estimates that 1.8 trillion invested in resilience by 2030 could actually generate 7.1 trillion in benefits. So investing 1.8 trillion for a return of 7.1 trillion. These are obviously undeniable economic argument for action, and an unprecedented opportunity to ensure these investments are climate resilient. And we heard, and congratulations to the ruler of Dubai also for the major investment plan for the future in this regard. I think it's also important to bear in mind that by 2050, 70% of the world population would be living in urban areas, which obviously requires also
Recording
major
in
investment.
progress.
I'm glad they can have the second part of my speech. So, good afternoon to colleagues online. So as I was saying, we are already seeing the devastating impacts of climate change on infrastructure and people, and not only in rural communities, but also now in big cities. So, it has been mentioned, the floods in Dubai earlier this year, but also, most recently we have seen the deadly floods in Spain that have, further underscored the growing frequency of climate-driven emergency. And these tragic events, it's not only a powerful warning of the increasing frequency of what's happening and the intensity of the climate-driven emergencies, but it's also a clear reminder that wherever we thought we were safe and we had planned well, where actually we were wrong. We are not shielded from actually devastation, even in the cities of the most developed countries, and that requires actually a lot more preparation and thinking, hence, the vital mandate of the Office on Disaster Risk Reduction. For the UAE, resilience is central to its sustainable development. So it's not only, the reaction to the recent floods in Dubai, it's everywhere in all the strategies and the vision of its leaders. So initiatives like the Emirates Framework for Global Climate Resilience, launched at COP28, really emphasized the adaptation alongside mitigation. Which is very much at the heart also of sustainable development. I think it's important, since we are hosted in the UAE, to also, recall that the UAE is leading in proactive disaster financing through the Charter of Finance for Managing Risk, which ensures resources are in place before disasters strike. So minimizing obviously the losses on people and infrastructure. And since we are at an event with the private sector Arise, obviously the pivotal role of the private sector in the transformation is very much illustrated in the business model developed in the UAE. The businesses are not only stakeholders, they are really drivers of innovation, drivers of change, not only for financing, but also for scalable solutions. And we also know how, in terms of artificial intelligence and technology, Dubai and the UAE at large is actually positioning. So we really look forward for these innovations to be, at the service of the common good and the disaster risk reduction. I will, just would like to emphasize again the importance of public-private partnership, and this is something that the UAE is looking at not only in the UAE but also abroad. So we really hope that the discussions today will also serve for looking at how experiences and South-South cooperation can benefit for other parts of the world. Resilience is obviously not only about infrastructure, it's about people. And if you allow me, I just would like to recall the UN Secretary's call, UN Secretary General's call to action on early warnings for all, which aims to ensure that every person on the planet is protected by an early warning system by 2027. Which means there's only 2 years to go since we're closing 2024. And today's symposium, being a call for action, I hope would contribute to this other call for action from the Secretary General to explore innovative solution. I just would like to praise again the work of Arise UAE, which is already leading the way, proving that resilience can be the norm, not the exception, and by integrating also disaster risk reduction into decision making. Very much looking forward for public and private sectors, local communities, engineers, investors, and policy maker to have a further role to play. In conclusion, I really thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today, and very much looking forward to the rich discussion this afternoon, which hopefully will be materialized into concrete actions. Shukran jazilan. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for the insightful remarks and for highlighting the growing role of the UAE, this beautiful land, in advancing disaster resilience. I now have the honor to pass the floor to Mr. Kamal Kishore, Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of UNDRR, to deliver the keynote address. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So, dignitaries listed on the slide here, Dr. Mahmoud Al-Burai from the Real Estate Regulatory Agency, the resident coordinator, my own team, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I am really happy to be with you this afternoon in Dubai, where the UNDRR Arise Network, UAE Arise, Sobha Reality, and UNDRR come together to discuss this very important area of resilience of infrastructure system, but also resilience of our infrastructure systems as well as the other built environment, including real estate, in the context of extreme heat. So even though the way the symposium has been structured is that first part we discuss regulation for a resilient infrastructure, in the second part we discuss extreme heat, but I think that they also intersect, so we also have to bring them together and see how extreme heat affects the resilience of infrastructure systems, and how do we imagine a future where infrastructure is able to not just withstand extreme heat, but also continue to perform the kind of services it needs to perform in conditions of extreme heat. So what I want to say is that for us to successfully work in this area at the intersection of resilient infrastructure and extreme heat, there are 4 things that need to happen, and for those 4 things to happen, I have 3 expectations of the Arise network here in Dubai, in the region, and globally. So let me first talk about the 4 things that need to happen. I think the first basic thing is that we need to have a better system of assessing risk to infrastructure as well as risk from infrastructure. in the 21st century, in changing climate, this whole issue of how do you assess risk has become much more complicated. It is complicated by two factors. One is that in the 21st century, you cannot look at discrete infrastructure assets, they are all networked. So what happens in one place affects another location. What happens in one infrastructure sector affects another infrastructure. So how do we assess risk in a manner that it is systemic? We look at all the interconnections, not just within one infrastructure sector. Of course, we have to look at that as well, but also across different infrastructure sectors. So the risk that is that a power infrastructure has got implications for telecom infrastructure. The resilience of telecom infrastructure has resilience for the entire digital infrastructure. The resilience of digital infrastructure has whole implication for all the infrastructure that underpins the global financial system. So I think systemic approach to assessing risk is really critical. The second way it is complicated is because of climate change. So it sounds now cliched to say that past is no longer a good guide for the future, but it is indeed true. What is going to happen in the future is not based on what has happened in the past. There is a fair bit of uncertainty about what will happen in the future. We are seeing more extreme events happening more frequently, happening in newer geographies. So how do we take that into account? How do we account for that kind of uncertainty? So I think this whole area of assessing risk to infrastructure out into the future across different infrastructure sectors in an uncertain climate, in a changing climate, is a challenge we have to grapple with. The second is the role of regulation and standard setting, which is the principal subject of today's discussions. The regulation setting in most countries is a very slow process. The world is changing very fast. To give you an example, in many countries there is no nationally developed regulation for telecom infrastructure. Telecom infrastructure is developing at a breakneck speed. A regulation setting is not able to keep pace with that. How do you bring the best possible science into to regulation setting? How do you standardize education, so that people who are participating in infrastructure building have a certain level of qualification, a certain level of quality, so that they are really contributing to quality and resilient infrastructure. I think this is a big challenge. Regulation setting, it's easy to say that come up with the regulation. It is much more difficult to do it. Regulation setting, those of us who have worked with the government approach this with a lot of humility, because you realize that some of the best intended, most well-intended regulation can have negative implications, either in terms of creation of risk or by stifling innovation and stifling investment. So how do you create regulation which basically has a good balance between risk and reward? It controls risks, but it also rewards innovation. I think this is a whole complex area that we need to explore. The third is the role of finance. Most of the infrastructure requires private finance. Even in countries where private finance is difficult to attract, countries are trying to leverage finance using loans from multilateral development banks, so as some sort of guarantees to attract private finance. But how do we structure the financial system in such a way that it encourages investment in resilience and not in risk? How do we bring in long-termism into it as opposed to short-term gains of investment? That really requires rethinking our financial system, not just in the global south, but also in the global north. And finally, drawing on what we've seen here in Dubai in April, when we had massive urban flood, the kind that hasn't been seen in a living memory. We will be hit by major disasters. We will be caught by surprises. Our best laid plans will be, will come to nothing when extreme events, 1 in 500-year events occur. We need to have a system for supporting recovery in a swift way so that we actually build back better, not just say build back better. So these are the 4 pillars of our work, looking at risk assessment in a systemic way in a changing climate, coming up with smart regulation and standards, coming up with a good financial system which encourages investment in resilience, not in risk, and having predictable mechanisms to support recovery. With that, what do I expect from this very eminent group, a hall full of private sector people from across the region? My first expectation is that when we talk about investment in infrastructure or investment in real estate, can we now, and when we go to our investors, can we now begin to bring in the notion of risk adjusted return, that look, this is what you're investing, but this is the kind of risk, be transparent about it, and then say that with that risk taken into account, this is the kind of return you get, so that the conversation about investment in risk reduction, risk management becomes a completely normal day-to-day conversation. It should not be a special conversation. So how do we, as those of you who build infrastructure here in UAE and across the region, those of you who invest in real estate, and I see the regulatory authority of real estate here, you bring in the notion of risk-adjusted returns. The second expectation I have is that I am a firm believer that regulation must not be designed without considering the opinions of those who are being regulated. So it's not something that governments go in an isolated ivory tower and they decide what is the regulation. We need a society where there is a relationship of trust between the regulator and the regulated. Regulation must provide a level playing field for all those who are investing, all those who are being regulated, but at the same time it should really create a fertile ground for innovation, because if we do not invest wisely, our investments will not lead to prosperity and development for all our people. So how do we create a conversation here? And here I would like to hear from the private sector in this room, how are you going to engage with your governments, with the private sector in fostering a conversation around regulation? Regulation in the context of increasing risks and increasing uncertainty. What is the role you can play in it? What is your ask? As somebody who works for the UN and sort of in the public sector, I have the opportunity to interact with the governments, ministers and heads of governments. If you were to ask me to advocate for one thing, what is the narrative I should be taking to them about regulation for fostering resilience as opposed to risk? And my final point is that, which is about extreme heat. There's a lot of discussion on extreme heat, which is focused on human health, which is of course extremely important. We see the direct impact of human health. Perhaps we are undercounting the deaths related to extreme heat. There are numbers that go as high as up to 500,000 people every year. But in addition to human health, I think it affects everything that we do across all sectors of the economy. And infrastructure is also not left untouched by extreme heat. Real estate is not left untouched by extreme heat. It's power sector, it's water sector, it's roads, it's railways. All these sectors get affected by extreme heat. But I have not heard enough conversation on looking at the impact of extreme heat on infrastructure systems, whether it is power infrastructure or it is transport infrastructure or water infrastructure or global supply chains and so on. So can we today say that this is the beginning of a community of practitioners that will think jointly about how we will prepare for a warmer planet. How are we going to invest in infrastructure systems of the future so that they are better able to withstand extreme heat? So these are my three very simple, very humble expectations, and I'm sure we will all live up to that. And thank you very much, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation this afternoon and in the weeks and months to come in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, SRSG Kishore, for the powerful introductory remarks. We now move to the first panel. But before we do that, let's remind about the 4 pillars that the SRSG Kishore has laid out and the invitation to the private sector to engage in this task. The first panel is Resilient Infrastructure from Tools to Regulatory Change, and this will explore innovative tools, practical strategies, and regulations. To moderate this session, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Abhilash Panda, Deputy Chief of the Intergovernmental Processes, Interagency Cooperation, and Partnerships Branch at UNDRR. Dr. Panda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Very good afternoon. I was initially prepped up to give a few keynotes, kind of a speech, but after my first panel, after what SRSG, the RC, Mohammed Al-Burai, and Sujit have already mentioned, I won't bore you further with that. You know the challenge in front of us. I think the UNRC for UAE mentioned a figure from the OECD. There is also another competing figure of roughly $6.9 trillion per year that needs to be invested in infrastructure to meet the developmental needs. So one is definitely the financing challenge, but also we have a large stock of infrastructure already in place that needs to be looked after and to be resilient to itself. So we have colleagues today joining us from both private and public sector in this conversation. I would now extend the invite to them to join me on the podium, and we also have a colleague from the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, the DG Amit Proti, who will be joining with us online. But the ones in the room here, if I may kindly invite Mr. Natif Jama Adam, the chair of the Arid and Semi-Arid Land and Disaster Risk Management Committee for the Council of Governors of Kenya, please. Dr. Mahmoud Al-Burai, Senior Advisor, Real Estate Regulatory Agency, Dubai and Arise Vice Chair. Ms. Natalia Skummershiger, Procurement Manager, Nippon Koi LSC, please. Fadi Nualti, CEO, Kaizen Asset Management Services, please. Ms. Rima Nasser, Acting Executive Director, Community Hospitality and Service, AD Provis. All right, thank you. Thank you. Just be careful. So I'll join you there, but before I join you there, I'll first invite my colleague Amit Proti, the Director General of CDRI, who is joining us virtually from, I believe, from India, if he's not traveling. I won't take the thunder away from Amit on what the coalition is, and I think he's going to speak to that, but also what the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure is trying to do to address infrastructure resilience from a perspective of both public and private partnership, bringing the various actors into the processes. But as my previous panel members mentioned about, the role of regulations in that, the role of evidence-based data and science in that. So Amit, we are looking at examples and cases of how we can make it at scale and address this as an issue, and we are all ears to you. Amit, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Abhilash, and thank you everybody for allowing me to be online. In a way, it turned out well because I actually have a pretty terrible cold. So if I was in the room with you, I would have been wearing a mask, and you're seeing more of my face now than you would have probably seen when I was there. Um, Thank you so much for UNDRR and Arise Network for organizing this session. I think it's already been articulated the importance of the agenda of resilience. What is really critical is, we are looking at massive urbanization on one end, massive amount of infrastructure that is yet to be built, and increasing risks. We can't just sit back and say that we know what we're doing. In a way, we actually are all trying to figure out what we need to do to address the upcoming challenges. I will take a moment to share a presentation which will help articulate about the coalition, but also some of the things we are doing. So give me a second and let me see if I can share this. Are you able to see the presentation? Okay, great. I think I can see it on the side there as well. So the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, we are an international organization headquartered in New Delhi. We are very, very new. We were announced by the Prime Minister of India in 2019 at the Climate Summit in UN, essentially saying, there is a need to focus on resilient infrastructure. There's a need to focus on it from a perspective that is different, probably from the way we've been looking at in the past. There's a need for looking at it from a global south lens. And for that, there was a institution that he announced to be headquartered in Delhi. I'm very proud to be leading that institution. We have now 40 countries that have joined this coalition, as well as 7 organizations, including the UNDRR and Arise Network. UNDRR has been a partner on this literally from day -1. So it's been a great journey so far, building this coalition, focusing on the importance of resilient infrastructure. What we're trying to do is, the ambition is that by 2050, over $10 trillion of new and existing infrastructure investments and services become resilient to natural hazards and climate change. And if we do that, in effect, we are affecting the lives of over 3 billion people. So if you look at where infrastructure is to be built, if you look at where infrastructure investments are going to be happening in the next 3 decades or 2.5 decades, we're really talking about places where there's a lot of population that's getting urbanized. The organization, CDRI, the coalition, is trying to get to that ambition through 3 priority areas. The first one really is advocating for the importance of this agenda. Most of you may have already may be familiar with the Sendai framework, and if not, I'm sure Abhilash can give you some more pointers on that. But countries have already agreed to meeting resilient infrastructure as one of the key priorities of the Sendai framework. So for us, we're really trying to advocate for why it's important to look at regulation for this. Why is it important to look at data? Why is it important to really look at investments from a resilience perspective? The second part of our agenda is really coming up with more knowledge products, research, and focusing on capacity development. There is still a lot of need to build an understanding of how do you bring in climate science into our decision making. So we're trying to focus on that. And the third one is really providing technical assistance on the ground. So really helping countries and cities think about how do they address this increasing risk from climate change and disasters in their investments in infrastructure. Um, the SRSG talked about increasing risk, and maybe this will just help paint a picture of what we're talking about. If you look at the various systems that our that our cities depend on, energy, water, buildings, transportation, this graphic, if it's readable, this is actually coming out of an urban strategy that we launched last year, talks about how on one side heat, so the left side is heat, the right side is flooding. The energy sector is at risk from heat because of increase in peak loads, potential system failure because of unplanned cooling demands, reduced grid inefficiency, increasing transmission and distribution losses that can lead to blackouts and brownouts. Even the physical infrastructure itself can sag because of extreme heat. Floods affect the energy system because of, again, disruptions to the transmission and distribution system. etc. Same thing on water, heat increases demand, floods in the water sector can actually lead to pollution, can lead to water quality problems, etc. Buildings, I think you're in Dubai. I don't need to tell you on the importance of how to keep sort of the emphasis on keeping a cool environment within buildings. That does have a huge energy demand, but that requires constant innovation in building energy efficiency, building in ways that really require a way to address these increasing risks from extreme heat. Dubai may know this, but other cities don't. And this is where you start to realize if you go to Paris today in the summertime, they don't have air conditioning, or inside they don't have fans. So you may be in Paris in the middle of summer and actually facing extreme heat challenges that you had never imagined. Same thing goes for transportation. I don't know if if you've experienced this, but I was in Amsterdam 3 years or just before COVID, and the trains from Amsterdam city to Schiphol were not running because the temperature was 34, 35 degrees, and the trains were actually not able to run because it was hot. So our systems are actually more at risk, both from extreme heat as well as flooding. And these are interrelated. When you talk about uh, the dependency on water, water systems depend on energy. So if you have an increased energy load and you need to run your water pumps for water supply, and you don't have energy, you can't run your water pumps. So there's a lot of interdependencies between different systems in the infrastructure sector, in the urban space, that we really need to understand if our cities have to address growing risks from climate change. Similarly, different kinds of risks pose different kinds of, different kinds of hazards pose different kinds of risks to our various infrastructure sectors. Within this context, what is CDRI trying to do? So last year we launched a report, and we actually came up with a risk database. The SRSG mentioned that we really need to understand risk better. We need common methodologies. We need a much more nuanced way of understanding what is the risk that we are going to face 10, 15, 20 years down the road when our infrastructure has to be functioning under different climate conditions. We've built a model which is in the public domain, which is at a country level, where we're trying to understand risks from 6 hazard types for 8 infrastructure sectors. We also came up with a number to actually make the case to decision makers. When we look at the amount of infrastructure we could lose in a given year because of 6 kinds of hazards, we're talking about something like 732 to 845 billion dollars of annual average loss that could be suffered. This includes infrastructure, this includes building, this includes earthquakes, this includes floods, this includes cyclones. 70% of this risk is coming from climate related hazards. So this methodology that we have built is actually one of the first that's actually looking only on the infrastructure sector. And the idea is that by talking to countries about the risk that they're facing in the infrastructure sector, we can then have a more nuanced discussion on what is it that we need to do. This model looks, there's a mapped version of this. It's not at the urban scale yet. So we've actually done GIRI 1.0, which is at the national level. We are moving now to GIRI 2.0, which will actually also have data on urban. It allows policymakers to start to understand differentiated risk. So for example, in the UAE, again, this is a global model looking at global databases. Earthquake is still a significant risk to your different infrastructure sectors, but that is not equally spread across each infrastructure sector. So in the power sector, flooding is much bigger a risk. In the roads and railways infrastructure sector, landslide actually poses a risk as well. And we have this information for every country in the world, again, as an advocacy piece to get the conversation started. The idea is that we'll actually take this more downscaled in the next version of this model that is in the public domain, that is built with some of the best modelers in the world. We're also coming out with specific infrastructure related frameworks. So we just released this document last week at the COP with BCG. We're looking at, this looks at what is the opportunity to address risk in the transportation infrastructure? How do you look at it across the the enablers, the policy side? What is the role for the private sector? What is the role for innovation? In this, we are making a call to develop both national and subnational adaptation and resilience plans for the transportation sector, mainstreaming of climate risk assessment for transportation infrastructure. So if you think about transportation, we are looking at flooding that is causing increased flooding that can cause landslides and can impact transportation. Heat can impact transportation. We're talking about resilience in the procurement system, and I think one of my co-panelists will talk about it, talking about skill development as well as availability of finance and access to address increasing risks in the transportation infrastructure. Very quickly, and I'm going to wrap up, what we're trying to do is then do technical assistance in across several sectors on the ground. So we're working on power sector resilience. We're looking at disaster risk financing at national levels, understanding whether the national budgets are ready if they're going to be hit by disasters. We have an open call for an urban resilience support that we're providing to cities to look at infrastructure intersection with extreme heat and flooding. With UNDRR, we have done a policy framework for four governments. These studies are just coming out, looking at the entire national policy framework to understand where do you bring in resilience. We're looking at health infrastructure resilience, telecom, as well as transportation sector resilience. So very quickly, this is a snapshot of where we are as CDRI, what we are trying to do in terms of technical assistance on the ground, in terms of data, as well as in terms of focusing on specific sectors to understand their risks and interdependencies with other risks. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
All right, online they cannot hear us. Okay. Thank you very much, Amit, for that comprehensive presentation. Since you are not feeling very well, I'm not sure if I would like to keep you waiting for the entire 2 hours. But I see there is a hand raised on the Zoom platform. But I would also like to, Amit, if you're okay, if we can take a few questions or if there is any queries to you at this point of time. My colleagues who know where this there is a hand raised, I cannot read the name, but if we can give the floor to Ms. Ahmad El-Sawai. Did you have a question for our colleague from CDRI, Amit? All right, okay, maybe not. Can I pass the floor to you then?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Bérangère Boel, DRC in the UAE. Thank you so much for the comprehensive presentation. And I'm actually, eager to know more, so I will definitely do my piece of research. But I was just surprised by the last slide you shared, showcasing actually where you have had partnerships on different initiatives. And I could not see any in Africa. And that would be quite interesting to understand also, the strategy that is taking place, and if so, why Africa is not, at least for now, part of your, of your planning, considering also that it's the continent that is the most affected and with the highest population growth. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I can definitely compliment that for Amit. But Amit, if just wait, if we can, I'll see the room. If there are any further questions, we can take all together. Are there any other questions to Amit from the room? From my panel? No? All right, Amit, so on Africa, please, Amit.
Sure. Yeah, so I think that's a very, very important question. And what we are trying to do, and given that we are about 4.5 years old, And given that this is a relatively new topic, we are trying to make sure that when we are looking at developing frameworks, they're actually applicable in those contexts. What we don't want to do is pick up a framework from parts of the world where that might work fantastically well. I lived in Singapore for 5 years. I've lived in Vietnam for 5 years. There are certain things that will work in Singapore that will never work um, in Hanoi, for example, right? So I think what we're also trying to do is when we're looking at Africa, so we actually have 4 countries that are already members of the coalition. Madagascar, Ghana, South Sudan, and Mauritius are already members, and we're actually doing things there already. But we're also being very conscious that Africa requires African solutions. We don't want to bring through a coalition solutions from other places. To do that, we need to really build up partnerships on the ground with the people who are actually doing work already on the continent. And that's where trying to sort of, one with UNDRR itself, we've actually partnered looking at Ghana, for example, with the governance work that they're doing in Ghana. But we're also now starting conversations with a telecommunication infrastructure provider in one of the African countries based on a similar study that was done in a different country, which was very similar in its institutional structure. So stay tuned on Africa. I think we're very much conscious that that's a continent we do need to work in, but we need to work in a way where you're actually providing solutions that will work on the ground. I hope that answers the
Recording stopped.
All right.
Didn't like math.
Thanks, Amit. And just to complement, we CDRI and UNDRI have also assisted Madagascar in looking at the infrastructure under stress of the country through a systems lens, and to identify where exactly the gaps are. But also, having said that, this year South Africa has the G20 presidency. This would be the first time G20 would be with South Africa and the continent. And the Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group of the G20 has resilient infrastructure as one of the key priorities. So one of the intent within that conversation is how do we look at solutions that's applicable to African continent, but with a more of a bespoke lens that it's applicable based on what the needs and resources requirements are. So Amit, thanks again for being with us virtually, and hope you get better soon. And if you want to stay on, you're most welcome. But if not, we'll let you carry on with your day.
Thank you so much, and my apologies. I really wanted to come there, but I'm an architect and I'm ex-AECOM, so for me, there are a lot of reasons I wanted to be there, but unfortunately, I just couldn't come. Thank you so much again for having me, and bye, everybody.
Right. Thank you very much, Amit, for taking out time. So this, what you heard from Amit, CDRI is an intergovernmental organization. So the perspective that Amit brought forward from CDRI side has, technical assistance to countries or the members of CDRI, the evidence base that CDRI is trying to bring forward, the research, the partnerships that they are trying to forge. But it's across member states, across partners, across agencies. But to take the matters further into details, I would like to then go over to our next panel member, Mr. Natif Jama Adam. You are representing the, let's say, I won't say exactly local government, but you have the perspective of the local governments. Most of the infrastructure and assets are local in nature. The challenges that you see are also based on that perspective and that significance of things. So I think what would be helpful to us is to get a feeling from you. Like what do you see are some of the challenges that you're looking at, but what are some of the solutions that you're also encountering that could, that have the ability to scale up?
Thank you very much. Actually, I thought I had some few slides to share.
I'm sure.
If I can be allowed to do that,
I'll
appreciate it.
They'll come up. You can, maybe we can start and they will fix it up.
Yeah. First of all, let me say that I'm extremely honored to be part of this symposium this afternoon in Dubai. I come from Kenya, and I am one of the governors of the 47 counties of Kenya. Kenya now has been divided into different states, but we call them counties basically. And I am the governor for one of the counties in the northern part of the country. I'm also the chairperson of one of the 18 committees. That committee is the committee for the Council of Governors in charge of risk management, disaster and risk management, and also the committee that is concerned with all matters to do with the ASAL counties. ASAL, of course, stands for arid and semi-arid lands of the country. Now, in my presentation in the slides, you will see that those counties that I'm talking about actually form about 60%, if not more, of the landmass of Kenya, the 10 most arid counties of Kenya. Now, unfortunately, most of the risks, particularly relating to climate change matters, tend to affect those counties, and I'll share some of those slides. And therefore, we find ourselves at the forefront of having to deal with a disaster of different types, but more so disasters relating to climate change matters. And therefore, as you said rightly, action has to be oriented very, very effectively by ourselves towards managing those disasters on a continuous basis. And therefore, I think that also calls then for a lot of activities in terms of trying to see how to mitigate those disasters continuously, so that we create a situation whereby we are able to mitigate, and including matters infrastructure for that matter. Yes.
Thank you, Excellency. I'm just wondering if we can still have your slides up, or we could come back to you. Right? I think as they try to fix the issue at that end. So, perspective from international intergovernmental organization challenges a bit, and we haven't heard the details of it yet, which will still come up. The next four of my panel members are, I would say, more from private, not just more from private. I mean, to start from Dr. Al-Burai, there has been something called the real estate resilience discussion within the context of UAE, but also it's something that's not just limited to the conversation in this region, but also, I think I should come back to you later because his PowerPoint is back again. Yeah. Is this the right one? Yeah. I think if you can just say next slide, they will. You have a clicker here? No, there is no clicker here.
Okay, let me try that. All right. So, as I was saying earlier, I'm definitely honored to be here, because given the mandate that I have, which I mentioned briefly as the chair of the Council of Governors, of the Kenya Council of Governors, for the ASAL regions and for risk disaster management, when I saw this symposium that was invited to me by, actually, should I say, the co-chair of ORISE, a lady who is with us here, and also is also from my country, Kenya. And I really want to appreciate and thank the board and the team of ORISE for actually giving the opportunity to a Kenyan to be the co-chair of this very, very important forum. So when I saw this topic, I said, despite my busy schedule in Kenya, but I said, let me actually come for one day and share some of the issues that we're dealing with out there. Now, this is what I was talking about. Kenya now is a country of 47. You can call them in states, but we call them counties. Now, Garissa, as you can see where I am the governor is the green one towards the border with Somalia. And of course, the rest, 46, as you can see, are all scattered. Now, if you were to look at, as I was saying earlier, these are the 10 most arid counties of Kenya, covering about 60% of the land mass of Kenya. And I said earlier, a number of the major disasters that occur in the country, particularly those related to climate change, occur in these countries. And hence, why we formed also another entity called Frontier Counties Development Corporation to deal with the matters specifically affecting these 10 countries. Now, I won't dwell much on these slides, but of course, it is in the ASAL counties of Kenya where we find ourselves dealing in almost regularly on, with the disasters, whether they are man-made or natural. Of course, we know disasters also are man-made, not necessarily natural, but and therefore continuously also deal with the negative effects that take many years to recover from, if indeed recovery is at all possible. A few examples from my county, for instance, some of the disasters that we have seen. There is, for instance,
recording in progress.
There is a weed. I don't know whether it is known in this part of the world. We call it mathenge in Kenya, or Prosopis juliflora. It's a weed that basically requires continuous management from us. I'm sure it's known to some of the colleagues in the house here, or in the hall here, because it's such it's a very stubbornly invasive weed that quickly colonizes large tracts of land. And also it regenerates very quickly, making proper farming literally, an impossibility. Fighting it is almost difficult, and it also has a way that it actually eradicates all other vegetation types, including even the indigenous trees. It is toxic, sharply thorny, and for that matter causes livestock deaths. In the ASAL counties of Kenya, we're dealing with this weed, and it's really causing us a lot of trouble. Of course, we are trying to see how we can make the best out of it, with the challenges it's causing. But for instance, this is the Tana River, which passes between two counties of the ASAL region, my county and the other neighboring county called Tana River County. Now, these are basically the most arable pieces of land along the river, as you can see. But they have entirely been colonized by this weed, which continuously regenerates so quickly to the extent that actually even putting tractors becomes sometimes difficult. So it's some of the issues that the natural disasters, you find ourselves having to deal with on a continuous basis. But of course, we have to deal with them. I mentioned here also some of the regional conflicts which unleash large refugee populations across borders, probably man-made in this regard. And a good example is the Dab refugee complex, which also is found in my county, probably the largest refugee camp in the world. Now, when you have about 600,000 people, refugees living within your borders, and they have to live, they have to feed themselves, you find a situation whereby they go out, for instance, fetching for firewood for them to cook their food. And by doing that, they cause massive deforestation. Again, another man-made kind of disaster that you have to go continuously. You find yourself dealing with the same. In addition to also causing serious harm to our Miaga wildlife resources in the county. Look at, for instance, some few photos of the kind of wood they keep, go on cutting, in search for firewood for them to cook. So, with 32 years of having refugees in a county like myself, And with so much of cutting of trees, you find yourself really almost getting your, desertification happening in your own county. Now, these are issues and challenges that, of course, we have to deal with. And many times also we find ourselves head on with institutions like the UNCR and other UN organizations as to how to manage or mitigate this kind of issues. Let me just move first on this. Just basically sharing, some of the issues we, and also, as I said earlier, even, also going, in search of protein, they kill they go for the miaga, giraffes and the rest of the wildlife that we have in the region. Of course, these are issues that we continuously have to deal with. Of course, also other man-made, issues like terrorism attacks. That's once in a while occur. Bad ones like the one that we had with the Al-Shabaab militant group back in 2015, where we lost about 147 persons, mostly students in Garissa University. Again, issues that we have to deal with and ensure that they don't occur again. Locusts, invasions, a natural disaster that also really sometimes can be quite difficult to manage. But again, we have to develop or come up with local challenges, or local solutions as to how to face them. They cause a lot of trouble, like this one here of 2021, which we witnessed and has not been witnessed actually in more than 70 years, destroyed large tracts of crop and pasture for the county. In 2023, also 2022, we saw probably the worst drought in 4 decades, following the failure of 4 consecutive rainy seasons, to the extent that it was declared a national disaster by the national government. Now, of course, that led to about 40% of our county's livestock perishing. But again, we have to come up with solutions continuously. Now, from 2023, worst droughts to the worst floods just in a few months thereafter. So you can really see the effect of climate change and how it is affecting us. Now, the point is, with the myriad of disasters, traditional pastoralism has lost much ground, causing many previously successful pastoralist families to seek refuge in our main towns, basically what we call pastoralist dropouts. And of course, that comes with a lot of challenges: unemployment, a creation of unplanned settlements, and for that matter, the need for continuous budgetary support on unplanned settlements of that type. So what we are saying is, for us as the ASAL counties, even though most of these crises or disasters actually are as a result of climate change, and even though, of course, we share the same with many countries of the world, but I think the point here is that even though the South are contributing the least to global emissions, they are also the worst hit in terms of climate change circumstances. And therefore, we're saying that the way forward is more cooperation. I think the point here is that when I saw this forum, I got interested because the private sector is probably where we need to work with, even though solutions are local, and we, as the public sector, will indeed work to our best. But I think we need the private sector, and that's why in this slide I'm saying that what we need, despite the challenges we have with climate change, for instance, but we also have a lot of potential in those counties, which comprise a large section of Kenya. And therefore, what we're saying is that we have a lot of potential, whether it is in terms of creating value, or creating the value chains that are relating to livestock, which is a huge economic perspective in those counties, whether it is in the mining, whether it's in all those other sectors such as wind and the solar energy, and many others. Tourism, with all the challenges, again, these counties have a large population of wildlife that can easily, can create value. And therefore, what we are saying is we need, investors from the private sector, from groups such as Arise to work together, so that we can eventually mitigate. And I think the most important thing is that support, or rather working together, looking for the right investment, looking for FDI, for instance, for infrastructural interventions, as in line with the discussions or the subject of this topic today. And that's why I think for us, I came here to welcome investors in all the different sectors that I mentioned in my presentation. Particularly, I am looking forward to the creation of friends from Arise and similar like-minded groups for PPP investments for the ASAL counties of Kenya, where I am the chair. Public-private partnership investments, quite a plenty of opportunities out there in those counties, and therefore I hope that going back from Arise or coming to Arise will give us an opportunity to work together. Of course, the Council of Governors, which also I happen to represent today in this symposium, it will be more than happy to work with Arise and with other similar institutions, so that we are in a position to create value together in mitigating these disasters.
Thank you.
Finally, I just want to say that it was an opportunity to be here, and as we say in Kenya, karibuni. Kenya hakuna matata. Asante sana. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the scale of problems that or the challenges you are facing is immense. I'm sure there are a lot of partners who would be interested and willing to assist the Council of Governors and in your endeavor and the collective endeavor of things. I believe there is a Arise Kenya, the national network of Kenya, which would be to a certain extent the starting point of the conversation to get the national private sector to be engaged in the process of itself. But you mentioned something about the housing settlements and the challenges within that. I'm not saying that the scope of issues and challenges are the same everywhere, but that gives me a bit of a cue to move on to Dr. Mahmoud Al-Burai, which has to do with the real estate market in itself, right? That's a large proportion of the global stock of assets, infrastructure out there. We know that UAE Arise has been looking into this matter. There has been some efforts around the real estate resilience, understanding it, assessing it. But that's a big stock, right? Which we need to look at collectively. So again, I'm not trying to take the thunder away from you, but it would be nice to hear from you. What has been that effort? What is exactly the challenge? And it has to do something to do with the regulatory side of the housing market in itself, right? Dr. Al-Burai, off to you.
How long do I have?
I would give you 8 minutes.
Okay, good. So I'll leave it also to the private sector. We have great success stories here. They can talk louder about what we've been doing and what we want to reach. Just to start with, let's agree we live in something, we call it VUCA era, right? Things are volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and that requires transformational leadership. It requires system thinking. It requires public-private partnership. And this is what we do in Dubai. Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid always say, whatever is good for people is good for Dubai. Whatever is good for business is good for Dubai. So, and we always put people at the center. When COVID happened, we launched our 2040 strategy and urban plan strategy for Dubai. Want Dubai to be the best city on earth for people to invest, live, and work. Want to double our population. With that comes all the challenges of the pressure on the infrastructure. Real estate is a major sector. It's 15% of our economy. We have 217 nationalities of investors who invested in Dubai. In a monthly basis, we have 10,000 new investors who call Dubai home, who never invested in Dubai before. So being an international market, we as a government, and here I want to put the government hat, I have so many hats, but my government hat is, we look at things, we want to make sure that people who choose Dubai to be home have the best experience when it comes to safety and health. We're one of the safest countries and cities on earth, and safety when it comes to the issues
we had recently in April, the climate change impact, and the government response was quick. But even before that, when COVID started, we mandated all buildings in Dubai to have a WELL designation focusing on health and well-being. Then we started working with companies on reducing of energy consumption and water consumption, want buildings to be more sustainable, more green, and the health impact of that. But then when the impact, what we've seen in April, we, at that time, our resilience tool that we started with UNDIR was ready. Rima and Fadi and the team has done a great job in putting this into a digital platform. We tested it in a few communities, and the most important thing was preparedness. How do we make sure that we are prepared for climate change? And maybe for a long time we did not feel the impact, but now we're feeling the impact. So we want developers, and that's why we have two projects part of our strategy. One is called Developers Protocols, where developers in Dubai have to abide by the government protocols when it comes to risk reduction, and we've been working with developers to make sure that all these developers are ready, they have the right systems, tools, competencies in place. And second, we work with the community management companies, and we have a few examples here. We work with them first on being ready, second, assessing all the kind of risk, and being ready for any climate issues. So the most two important risks that we look at here in Dubai, part of Resilience Center, is the climate change, and secondly is the cybersecurity. But climate change, which has a direct impact on people's houses, this is something that the government has taken into account, and that's why mandated using resilience tool for all the community management companies in the freehold market. They have to make sure that they implement this tool. It's linked to Mullak system, which is a government tool. So we're happy to see this is being taken forward. We're going to work with the province, and we're going to work with other companies to make sure that we are implementing it, and we have success stories that we can share, that we can scale. Awareness is important. Making sure that the private sector speaks the same language. And again, I've been into so many events, and what we find all the time, the government speaks something, the private sector another language, the UN maybe a third language. So coming together and speaking the same language, talking about challenges, co-solving these problems together. We believe in Dubai in what we call it the partnership, and this is SDG number 17. This is the partnership. You cannot do it without government, without private sector, without innovation, technology companies, and that's why we have plans for technology accelerator when it comes to resilience, working with different developers, how we source international technology solution to make our buildings more safe, affordable, sustainable, resilient, and at the end of the day, that will help with the country vision and agenda, which is making the city one of the best. So we currently, apart from this tool, we're working on real estate resilience and sustainability policy, and this is work in progress. It's 80% done. So we'll have a real estate policy on sustainability and resilience. We have this tool. We're also working on a data sharing platform, because something you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. So we want to measure it, we want to make sure we have the right forecasting system, preparedness. We know from experience where were the worst issues, where it happened, how to be ready. We work with all the industry, and this is what we've been focusing on. I don't want to take more time. I really want you to hear from the private sector a lot of success stories. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Dr. Albury. But before I go to Natalia, when you say real estate, what's your definition of real estate?
Well, that's a good question. You know, we have a lot of developers here in Dubai, and the major focus usually on how do we make money. And real estate for us is the buildings and selling these buildings. But now for us, real estate is a system. The buildings, the infrastructure, the neighborhood, the energy, the transport, all the subsystem that Mr. Kamal was talking about today, and the connectivity of all these subsystems, the digital infrastructure, they're all part of what we call it the city system. So for us, real estate is beyond buildings. It includes the whole life and urban living in the city. You like the definition?
No,
You want me to change? I can't.
No,
change.
not yet. But I get a hint from Dr. Albury that I'm supposed to hear more from three of you rather than from him on the experience of the implementation of the real estate resilience tool. But there are other factors involved in this. So maybe I'll start with you, Natalia. You look after the procurement within the organization. And if I'm not mistaken, when you look at procurement, resilience by default would be a criteria to a certain extent. But what has been the experience of working with Arise UA largely, but also on the implementation of this tool within that domain?
Hello, it's working. Okay, so regarding what I've seen in procurement processes in Brazil over the past few years, I cannot say that resilience is kind of being included in what they are asking for in the projects. And actually that's, we see that kind of as a problem, because we as a private company, a Japanese private company, we always worry a lot about disaster prevention. I mean, in Japan, they have like this culture of disaster prevention and wanting to make the cities and the infrastructure more resilient, because that's like really important. And in Brazil, we do not have the same mindset. In Brazil, we kind of do not give the proper attention to resilience as a whole, like infrastructure resilience or the city's resilience. So in this coming years, I mean, we are seeing a lot more of natural disasters due to climate change that we haven't seen in Brazil for a long time, because I mean, in Brazil, we do not have disasters such as earthquakes, volcanoes, and hurricanes, but we are a society that's very vulnerable to climate change and the disasters that are occurring because of that. So in our projects, we usually are trying to include this resilience assessment and also some studies regarding climate change in our master plans and so on. But in Brazil, it's kind of hard to include like more subjects in our projects, because many times like the budgets from the projects are really limited. And the structure of the procurement process are kind of strict. So we don't have like regulations and consistent regulatory framework that include this type of assessment in the projects in Brazil. So I think we need, like, I think Brazil really needs to change a little bit the regulation there in order to start to thinking about resilience and including resilience and climate change in the infrastructure projects that we have there.
Thanks, Sithali. Brazil has, in this year, you mentioned like some of the events, right? There were the floods in Rio Grande do Sul. There was the blackout in Sao Paulo.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Right?
A lot of fires too.
Fires too, right? All right. So you're saying that from the procurement side, you still don't see a mandatory requirement of inclusion of disaster risks in those. But where do you see the opportunity for the private sector in Brazil to work towards with the government in ensuring some of these are taken into account? Because a lot of these assets are privately owned also, right?
Yes, I mean, I think for private companies in Brazil, since we are starting to see more disasters, actually now people are starting to think a little bit about the resilience of the city. So for us, I think what we try to make is bringing new technologies from Japan and also new approaches in order to be able to access resilience in the cities and build resilient infrastructure with not so higher cost. So I think what we need now is kind of do some like pilot projects in order to show a little bit about what we can do to improve the resilience in the city, the tools that we have, and show the government the importance of that, and trying to have like a dialogue with them, with the government, in order to implement the necessity of this kind of resilience studies and climate change studies in the projects in Brazil. So I think we need to show them like the importance and what could be done and how can we do it.
Right, understood. I'll keep, there are other questions I have, but I'll go further with Fadi and Rima, because I'm seeing, what is the bridge now with what Dr. Albright was mentioning about. And then we know there are further questions maybe from the audience on some of those things. Thank you. So maybe first to you, Fadi. The real estate resilience tool, or there is more to this?
Thank you very much. Interesting topics discussed today. I think I need the clicker, if you don't mind. So just to give a bit of context and to carry on from where Dr. Mahmoud Burai was discussing, there is a strong alignment between the private and public sector in the UAE. The public sector represented by Dr. Mahmoud Burai is part of the United Nations Arise. He brought us all together actually and brought in the right people to join Arise, and I joined I think around 2020. In 2021, as we were discussing disaster risk reduction, Arise has actually commissioned Arup, which is an engineering company out of the UK, to put together and work with the private sector to create to create a real estate resilience tool. Now, we have tools for everything in life. We have tools to measure sustainability. You have your LEED certifications and other certifications. You have certifications like as Dr. Mahmoud mentioned, that mentioned the wellness of communities. You have different kinds of tools and certifications. However, there wasn't anything that was really focused on resilience. Now, most companies in the world, we all have business continuity plans. We all have emergency preparedness plans. However, most of those are related to whether the company is prepared for these disasters. None of these were actually tools that would help us identify whether each real estate project was actually prepared against disasters. And as a company, we manage about 220 projects. Again, similar to all companies, we had emergency preparedness plans, but we never had thought about resilience per building and whether each building and each property was ready from a resilience perspective. Now, to Dr. Mahmoud's point, we created this tool in 2021. We started implementing it in 2022. By 2023, we had covered all of our 200 buildings. And when we had the flood in April 2024, this year, which everyone has been talking about, by the way, this flood, for those of you who don't know, we had a year and a half worth of rain in 24 hours. And it was the highest level of rain in 75 years in Dubai and the UAE. In comparison with the last flood, which was a lot less disastrous, I would say, during this flood that we had in April, only 2% of our projects were affected versus around 20% in the flood before that, before we had implemented the tool. So we could see great benefits directly across 200 buildings in being more prepared against climate change and against disasters. These are not my slides. Okay, yeah, no, I can't explain. Was it? Almost there, I guess. Yeah, nice pictures. Okay, so very simply, what the tool does is it helps stakeholders understand the key contributors to real estate operations and also assets. It helps assess the company's performance against these contributors, and the beauty again here is this assessment is building specific, or project specific or city specific. And then it helps us utilize this information for better preparedness, ensuring the resilience of assets in the face of unexpected disruptions. And it goes around 6 different dimensions, which is asset and infrastructure, economy and finance, natural and urban systems, society and well-being, governance and leadership, and last but not least, strategy and innovation. It's an Excel-based tool. So it works on Microsoft Excel very simply. Provis have done some work to take it from an Excel-based tool into an online platform. But the beauty of the tool is it's very easy to use. It's made to be used by consultants, contractors, real estate developers, management companies, and so it covers everyone in the supply chain, and also covers all kinds of asset classes, so residential, commercial, retail, and so on. Within each dimension, there are multiple factors that are considered, and for each dimension, there is a weightage that is provided across the 6 dimensions. Now, if we dive deep into each of these dimensions, looking at, for example, asset and infrastructure, the tool asks and forces you to think whether you have spare capacity available. Now, we used to have, let's say, spare parts available, but we never used to think whether they were accessible to that building during a potential disaster. Our thinking prior to this tool was, we have spare parts, yes, great. Our thinking after the tool became, do we have spare parts for that building, in that building, or within a 5-minute, 10-minute walk from that building? Are our critical systems in order? Are we taking into consideration accessibility? When it comes to economy and finance, now the tool asks you questions as to whether you are prioritizing short-term investments in resilience to gain in the long run. This is an area also where that helped us during the recent flood, is that we had the right cash being available on the side to be prepared for that flood. Had we had this flood without using the tool or before using the tool, we would have struggled a little bit when it comes to economy and finance. Natural and urban systems, again, one of the key words here, and we spoke about it today, is dependencies to other systems. And that's where the tool helps you think about these dependencies and whether the dependencies that you have are actually resilient or not. Because resilience is not about you only being resilient, it's about others. Society and well-being. And the key word here is supply chain, but not just supply chain in making sure the building or the project is operational in the face of disaster, but it's also thinking about whether residents and the society has access to pharmacies, has access to groceries in the face of a potential disaster where maybe transportation is affected or movement is affected. Governance and leadership, and over here is looking at making sure everyone in the organization, from the leadership team all the way down, are thinking about resilience, and that resilience is embedded in the processes and the procedures of the company. And I can say that 2 years down now, we've embedded resilience across 80% of our processes. There is still some work in progress to be done. But prior to the tool, we were not thinking about connecting our processes or about updating our processes to include resilience thinking as part of day-to-day processes. Last but not least, strategy and innovation, and thinking creatively of what is it that can be done outside the box to enable us to even be more and more resilient. Obviously, I've just covered glimpse or an example under each, but the tool really is very comprehensive in that it forces you to think about each and every factor in detail. So after you mark or assess or evaluate or give a score to each factor, and after you do that, say you give a score of 3 for one of the factors, the tool then asks you, are you sure? And as simple as that question is, it forced it in about 90% of the cases we went back and changed the score when we were asked, are you sure? And the tool asks you what gives you that surety. So if I score something at a 3 out of 4, the question is, what makes you so sure? If I am 80% sure, why are you 80% sure? Do you have evidence that is making you sure? Are there documents in place that says your equipment are prepared for climate change, and that's where you get your surety? Is it based on other factors? And it forces you to remain objective rather than subjective. It forces you to reassess and go back and question things again. And when I saw this originally, I'm like, if I'm scoring something, why do I have to go back and see how sure about it? And then we realized. Rima will cover some of the case studies and a bit more context about the tool in the next few slides. But one thing I want to say, just to conclude from my side, is the real estate resilience tool, if anything, forced our organization to talk about resilience in every meeting, and to give and gave us a framework to be able to even think about resilience. Because prior to that, if someone came to me and I run 200 buildings and said, "Are your buildings resilient?" my natural answer would be, yeah, they are. But once you start assessing and once you have that framework in place, forces you to think, forces you to dig deeper, and above all, forces you to be more prepared. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fadi. So after understanding the tool, our organization started around the end of 2022, and my presentation is stuck. So we started around the end of 2022, and looking at the tool really gave us a very fresh perspective on how we look at things. Coming from over 14 years in asset management and community management, it was great to see a tool that links the infrastructure and the asset resiliency with a different lens from the social, environmental, and economical sense. So it made a fresh eye and a fresh view of things, how we look at our infrastructure assets. So the first instinct was to put together a team from multidisciplinary.
Recording in progress.
Yeah. From multidisciplinaries, including facility managers, engineers, community managers, health and safety specialists, and recently we included building consultants to be part of this assessment procedure. We looked at the tool, and yes, it is simple, but when you go and start to applying it on the ground, we noticed that the process wasn't as easy as we go and assess and give score and use that scorecard to basically assess the resiliency of our communities. We had to follow a very iterative process in going back and forth. And we had to work with the governance and the regulatory authorities and Arise UAE in order to put together a roadmap on how we can achieve the target. So the start was to put together an assessment criteria and a guideline on how we can assess. First example was the infrastructure, asset and infrastructure, which is the seed and the base for any resiliency. We put a very rigorous program on how we can score each and every asset within the community. The start was to put a benchmark and a standard for measuring and assessing the resilience of each one of those assets. And then the second step was to spread awareness, educate the stakeholders on what is resiliency, and getting the support from the governing bodies. So on the planning process, we focused on several areas. First, we started with asset and infrastructure. We put a criteria to measure the risk assessment and impact analysis on each and every asset that we have within the community and its ability to withstand external shocks. This is just a quick category of how the criteria was developed in order to assess the first factor under the asset and infrastructure dimension. So since UNDRR focus on the asset, the people, and the procedure, we said the first thing, and to make things simple for the industry and to the different practitioners within the real estate industry, is to put an assessment criteria. So you get to stage 1 if you have risk analysis or a continuity plan, or you simply have a document to show what are the assets or what are the critical assets within your community. The second is how are you planning to mitigate any risk in the future? Do you have a mitigation plan to cross the gaps and to ensure the movability of a community continues and continuity of your management, even sometimes you are not on site? In the recent weather conditions that we had, some community managers were unable to be on site. So in this case, what do you do? How are you going to manage the community while you are miles away from your community? And then the third criteria of the ranking, which is ranking 3, did you execute? Have you tested on the ground? Did you do any drills? Have you done any stress test on your equipment that you're having? And finally, which is the golden standard, if you have done all the above and now you are accredited by a third party, like for example ISO certification or WELL certification or any other relevant certification within that factor. So because this requires a lot of work and a lot of assessment and deep thinking, as Fadi mentioned, it is not as simple as yes, we are ready. We thought that the best strategy and the best way to follow the resilience is to focus on one dimension at a time. So today we are looking after 50 communities where we are measuring the infrastructure and asset resilience. We developed the tool. However, we continue to develop the digitization. Connecting the assets that we have with the governance wouldn't be as efficient and effective unless we have a digital tool. So we started with a simple tool where we can just collect the data and be able to assess which companies and which communities are in compliance and which communities are not. But now having more stakeholders joining us, the platform and the digital online system is developed further and further. And again, as like everything else in real estate or any other industry, we need to make sure that we continue to listen to the end users, which is the owners in the community. So getting the buyout from the owners who fundamentally are part of this move, listening to them, understanding what they would like to see, and continuous evolvement of the tool to be able to match and align the priorities of the communities, priorities of the owners, along with the governance and the policies that we have, and keeping those policies and governance as a priority. As also Fadi mentioned, this is becoming now a priority to every transaction that we do, from procurement, from writing contracts, to even running the events that we have within the communities. So it is beautiful to see how everything coming along together. And finally, we are working as well with the regulator on hopefully finalizing the policies and procedures where this tool is essential for every community. This is how the tool looks like. This is one of the communities after 12 months of work with engineers, with different stakeholders. This is how it looks like. And these criteria, and if anyone would like to ask any questions after, then we can go through the measurement criteria for each one of these factors.
Yeah, and so imagine that all the buildings in Dubai, we have a dashboard with the regulator, and that's why the beauty of this is we know the weaknesses. So we know that these buildings, we need to there is a heavy rain above this amount, we have to be focusing on this area. So this is a great digital tool that the government is going to use. But again, on behalf of UAE Arise, if you allow me, I want to thank the real estate committee within the Arise. They've been doing a great job taking this tool to life, and you will see this tool really being implemented, and we'll see the impact hopefully on our communities and on our country. And also would love to share this internationally. Thank you. That's for Rima, not for me, please.
Yes. Yeah. Very efficient. Yeah.
This. Thank you. I was thinking of asking a question which I think partially it has been already responded, but I'll still go ahead asking it. What was the opinion of the regulator? Because in different contexts when we have gotten engaged in the conversation on real estate, it's a very tricky discussion because when you talk about real estate, and that's why I asked you the definition of real estate in this case, because to a certain extent the opinion is real estate is all about housing to a large extent. Right. And it has to do with accessibility to housing, the cost of housing, so on and so forth. So sometimes it's very, in the lack of another word, politically driven, charged conversation around that. In this case, depending on how the process evolved, what was the opinion of the regulator? And let's say to your buyers, was there appreciation or there was like a concern?
Okay, so the regulators actually are leading this conversation. We're lucky to be in a very progressive city where regulators actually lead progression and lead into the most recent and the latest developments. So understanding the importance of the resilience to the value of the real estate industry, we have full support, and as I mentioned, they are already leading these changes. Owners are part and should be always part of the discussion. Probably in the future we'll start working on committees with the owners. If you spread the awareness and start looking at the connection and the correlation between the resilience and the value of the community, the resilience metrics are connected also with the happiness metrics, which is very important to create an attractive and valuable community. The asset value, if you follow the resilience metrics, the asset value, if you are following rigorous and serious asset replacement programs based on the life cycle of the asset, that will impact directly the value of the asset, which is good for the whole industry as a whole. Regulators were very supportive, and not only as focus on the real estate industry, but connecting one industry with the other, because it is all looking at the resiliency. It's a holistic, and this is something that everybody shared here. It is a holistic approach. It is not just one community or one company at a time.
I don't know if I have anything to add, but I think in Dubai and the UAE, I think we're the only country in the world where private sector has to play catch up with the government. Dubai government already had a resilience center. Dubai police already has a resilience center, resilience academy. There are courses in American University of Dubai that are taught to the government leaders and the private sector on resilience. So it's the other way around. I think the government needed the private sector support to enable resilience in the city. And also when you asked about the residents and customers, they are at the forefront of Dubai's vision. We're the only country in the world that has a Minister of Happiness, I think. So everything is driven by that. When we're thinking about resilience, we're thinking of it from the lens of the happiness of people and the happiness of the residents of the city. And that's why we need to make this city more resilient.
Thanks for the, we would love if it happens in every country, right, where the private sector tries to catch up with the government in the same domain, right? And that's the aspiration and vision to a large extent of that. And I think Bhutan also has a happiness index, so good in that. Maybe Natalia, back to you, because I believe what you put out was the challenges from the procurement side of things, the regulatory side of things in Brazil. but as a private company where you are involved in infrastructure development in a country like Brazil, which is big, country has
Huge.
diverse, huge socioeconomic different disparities in itself. Risk factors are varied, and the needs are very high. It's an emerging economy which has a lot of needs, has a lot of infrastructure investment going in. So taking into account all the challenges that are there from the regulatory side of things, how is the company at your end, addressing some of these issues through your projects? Could already start addressing some from your own end?
Yes, sure. Actually, if I could show
Sure.
a little bit about my presentation. I put some tools that we developed inside the company. I think I need to find my. Oh, how do I go back? So, okay, just to start speaking a little bit. In our company, we have a research and development center, and actually, right now, I'm not staying in Brazil. I'm currently living in Japan for a few months. Doing a training at our research and development center with the resilience team. So I'm studying resilience in the cities with the provision of ecosystem services. So in this research and development center, we have some teams that are exclusively dedicated to finding AI solutions in order to apply in our projects. We have a climate change team. We have a resilience team. So now I got it. Okay. Now how do I stop it? Okay. So we always try to input these new tools that they've developed in the company in our projects, and also these insights. So just to speak a little about the company, as I spoke before, Nippon Koei, it's a consulting in engineering projects, Japanese company. And we from Nippon Koei Latin America and Caribbean in Brazil are members from Arise since 2022. So we are a company that is very committed to building a sustainable future. So we provide solutions that meet the needs of our customers in an environmentally responsible, socially just, and economically viable manner. And we also offer solutions to complex problems in the fields of engineering, technology, and sustainability. I'm going to skip a little bit so I don't take much of the time. So here I wanted to show a little bit about the sectors that we have projects in that include some of the matters about resilience and climate change. So we have done climate change adaptation plans, mapping of vulnerable areas and disaster risk management plans, solid waste management, and wastewater sludge use. Also hydrological and hydraulic modeling to increase the resilience of current infrastructure, nature-based solutions as green infrastructure, and some others. Okay, so and how do we achieve resilience in the city? So we believe that tools are vital for collecting and processing data that support decision-making for the appropriate design of public policies with the aim of developing more resilient cities, as well as for monitoring effectiveness and providing transparency and publicity to the interested parties with a focus on the citizen. So here I brought an example of a project that we developed in the state of Ceará in Brazil. It's a plan for decarbonization and climate change adaptation at this municipality. So among the reports that we delivered, we had a communication and training plan for the counterparts, diagnosis of GHG emissions, vulnerability and climate risk analysis, and also resilience and decarbonized development scenarios, and analysis of existing technologies against climate changes. And besides that, we also provided an integration action plan and minutes of a policy for mitigation and adaptation to climate change. So that goes a little bit in line with what I was talking about, having this dialogue with the government. So Here on top, you can see some of the maps that we delivered with the risk assessments and some of the vulnerabilities. Okay. And in here, I want to present a little bit about the tools that we have available in the company. So this is the Climate Vault. It's a portal website for obtaining future climate forecast information on rainfall, temperature, and etc. for major cities. It is available for free, so you can just access this website. We have a disaster prevention information platform that's called Bosque. So the Bosque provides cloud-based real-time disaster evacuation plan services and also support disaster response and evacuation actions, leading to a safety and security of local communities, and also provides disaster risk analysis and visualization of damage prediction. We also provide satellite information services, so we use optical satellites and SAR satellites to enable periodically highly accurate and long-term information collection, analysis, and evaluation, and also provide some projects of dam monitoring and real-time monitoring of some areas. We have the Tsumugi, which is a self-assessment tool of process evaluation that focuses on the implementation status of the plans and projects of local governments and assess its projects in each of the 17 SDGs. It's kind of a self-assessment tool that the government can answer a set of questions, and then we can assess on how the government is developing its action through the 17 SDGs. We also have high-quality disaster simulation that is close to the real event as possible with Flood VR. So we use 3D models and virtual reality to kind of show, I mean, this image of the top, you can put a glass on and you can see the image of a city with a flood hitting it, so you can see how long does it take to the water to rise, which is like a massive velocity that sometimes we do not kind of picture the velocity of the things, the disasters that they occur. We also have an interactive sea wave simulation that we developed with Game Engine, so it's kind of a really real simulation. This is a video, but I don't think I will be able to play it. And we also have some tools of flood simulations, but this one is also developed with Game Engine, and it's a very real video, but I don't know if I can play here. I think it's not working, the video, unfortunately. But I mean, with this flood simulation, we can like see how the water interacts with all of the objects that are around it. So it kind of gives us a good visualization of the disaster. So I mean, with these tools, we're trying to assess climate change and also include some resilience assessments in our projects in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Natalia. It's very interesting. I think we are more or less at the time. But before I conclude, we did give an opportunity for you to ask some questions to Amit, and then he has dropped off. Another opportunity, if you have, you have an example of UAE Arise, where they have partnered with both the regulator, the private sector, the academic side of the discussion, to bring real estate resilience into the forefront. An example from Brazil, and it's Japan, Brazil. Let's say, put it like that, right? There is experiences from Japan that are going to Brazil through Nippon Koei also, where it's trying to address some of the infrastructure challenges at large. And I know we have colleagues also from other Arise networks. I'm not going to pick names, but if there are any questions, remarks, or any suggestions to be made, yes, please, at the back end room.
Hi, my name is Ashish. I work for a real estate data analytics company. It's called Readin. Quite interesting, the platform that I just saw, and we were trying really hard to come up with So majority of our work in our platform is property mappings. Of late, after the floods, the Central Bank of UAE did give a regulation to all the retail banks in the region to basically map their properties, have latitudes, longitudes, elevation from sea level. So for us as a firm, it was very interesting to see climate risk data with respect to UAE as a focus. And typically two risk factors. One is the inland flooding, which we also experienced, and also excessive heat. Of the models that we studied, and we already have a lot of micro and macro data available across the UAE, we wanted to implement these two data sets in particular. One thing that we noticed is that the heat stress in Dubai for real estate, if it's Jabal Ali, the results are for entire Jabal Ali. It doesn't really differentiate between the street behind Ibn Battuta Mall or any other street which is less prone to flooding. And same goes for excessive heat. So out of your experience, I just wanted to know, is there a definition that you guys have kind of found when it comes to real estate climate risk, especially at a neighborhood level?
Scenarios.
I don't think it is necessary to actually go down so granular into a street level or a sub-community level. I think what's important is to make sure if your community, if Jabal Ali as a whole is prepared against all possible scenarios of climate change, then by nature of the tool, for example, your most weakest road within Jabal Ali will become your base of the assessment for all of Jabal Ali, because in your mind, as you're making sure Jabal Ali is resilient, you're going to have to make sure your weakest area within Jabal Ali, the issues there are addressed, and only then you can say that Jabal Ali is resilient at the moment. But you don't need to go that granular, otherwise it becomes very difficult and impossible to just gather data on a street by street level whether every street is resilient, unless of course it's a road like Sheikh Zayed Road or some major highway, then yes indeed. I hope this answers your question. And I think if you're doing some work on resilience already, please join us in UAE Arise.
Sure. Thank you, Fadi.
Any further questions to my colleagues here? I have a gentleman standing up. You have a question?
Thank you. My name is John Paul Kimanzi. I am a risk manager, Safaricom Investment, Kenya. I have a question to my governor from my country. I'll also give a comment on the return on investment after investing in resilience. I have a question to Dr. Kishore. So then I'll have a final parting shot. So for my governor, he started by saying 60% of Kenya is arid. I belong to that area. All those problems, I've encountered them one-on-one. So most of these problems are very historical. So first of all, Mr. Governor, I will really invite you to join Arise. We are really doing a lot of initiatives in Arise. Also on the bit of regulation, you can really help us, especially with the proposed regulations around where the government will be investing more to where there is request for services. Of course, this has a direct impact to our area where we are very less populated. So, of course, I also recommend measures which we can take, like water management, drought resilient agriculture, and also community engagement. But Mr. Governor, on the same, you've been in power since you came this term. So what are the resilience mechanisms you are bringing in place just to show leadership to other counties? I would really want to know. And what is the status of the problem when you came? And what so far the steps you've taken? So welcome to Arise. That question to you. So the second bit to Mahmoud, if I've gotten your question right. So you started the conversation very well. Like you invest in resilience and you get, I mean, we are in real estate. We are in the business of making money. So that bit, I'm very glad. Also, I want to share a bit where we adopted a technology from Malaysia. So this technology will help us to come with a very resilient buildings, and also, so we adopted it. We saved 20% in our business model. So that technology is called Formworks. We adopted it from Malaysia. So after this session, it is my spirit that we share more of this, so that I can pick a few, I go back with them to Kenya. I believe that is in order. So just to say on Dr. Kishore, he said they are very in telecommunication. The investment in resilience is very minimum. I didn't get it because I know in telecom, it is an industry whereby the key risk is the cyber security, and I know, or according to my experience and having worked in telecommunication, resilience is a very key investment. So maybe is it to a particular risk or in general? So okay.
Thank you. No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You had 3 questions, and you said at the starting that you have a parting shot. We'll keep the parting shot for later. So, Governor, welcome to Arise. He already he already made you join Arise. But I think the question he has is, some of the resilience efforts at your end in itself. Mahmoud, I think he wants to talk to you later on exchanging the technology of Malaysia. And SRSG, if you would like to speak a bit around the telecom question.
Well, let me say that when I saw, as I mentioned earlier, actually, when I saw the theme of this forum, and I got the invitation from co-chair, I immediately cancelled my other engagements, and I said I must come because really it resonated very well with me, and with what I was doing in what I'm supposed to do as a mandate for the ASAL counties, i.e., disaster risk management and infrastructure. They just go very well together. And I must say that I'm extremely honored to be here. Once again, I feel that actually it's a great forum, a great place to be. And I have no reason why I should not be a member of Arise. I'm not yet familiar with the membership requirements, but definitely I'll be more than happy to discuss and see how, not just me, but also the Council of Governors of Kenya, whom I represent here, should be joining actually Arise, so that particularly the ASAL block that I do represent. So thank you very much. I think that is quite a welcome proposition. I'll take it forward and see how we can work together. More important actually is really what I'm already learning this afternoon. The issues being raised here are quite encouraging, and I think Dubai, of course, as always, is leading the pack, and we have a lot to learn in terms of ensuring that we also up our game in some of these issues, so that we catch up with some of the matters being raised, particularly regarding technology and risk management in terms of infrastructure and buildings. Of course, what we do as counties there and as leaders, disasters are it's work in progress. So we keep whenever they happen, we learn one or two things so that we can improve on our leadership more and more better. For instance, upping our game in terms of issues such as response mechanisms. At the moment, for instance, all the counties that I represent, the 10 the ASL counties, we're ensuring that we have upped our game in terms of response mechanisms, in terms of the how do we, for instance, move quickly with disasters. Things like floods are sometimes unpredictable. You can try as much as possible, but sometimes the rains as expected may just not be what you thought will happen. So I think it's a continuous learning process, and I think we are exactly trying our best in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. Sorry, Chief.
Well, I'm not on the panel, so ideally I shouldn't answer the question. But since you asked, there are basically two aspects to it, telecom. One, I was referring to physical disaster and climate risk. If you see many coastal areas, in many cyclones, up to 5% of telecom towers fall down in strong winds. And I don't think that is acceptable. This happens because you're building telecom network in Mozambique using the standards from Australia. The wind speeds that you will experience in Australia are not the same that you will experience in Mozambique. So I'm not saying it's not an actual case. I'm just using those names. So it's really important that the standard setting for the physical resilience of telecom infrastructure assets is based on the local hazard conditions. That has not happened because the sector is going so fast, and regulatory bodies are barely able to keep pace with the growth. The second aspect is the operational resilience. For example, most telecom towers do not have battery backups for more than 7 hours. So it doesn't have power. So the tower has survived, but the electricity connection to it has disrupted. It has only 7-hour backup, and the power distribution and transmission system, it takes 3 days to restore. So basically after 7 hours, the telecom services stop. And the third thing is that if you go to most countries, if you go to the telecom service providers and you ask them for data on what was your disruption time after a cyclone or a flood, either they don't have the data or they are not sharing the data. So it's very clear that the investment that needs to happen into physical disaster and climate resilience of telecom sector is not happening. There are many reasons for that, but that's a separate conversation. One reason is that in most countries, telecom companies are operating in hugely competitive environment. So they are really cutting cost wherever they can. So the key thing for the telecom regulator here is that when they are negotiating, when they are calling for bids for allocation of spectrum, this functionality, these standards should be there, that you have to ensure 24-hour power backup. You have to ensure that your towers are able to withstand 150 kilometers an hour wind, etc. So when that is the level playing field, cost will go up, but only marginally, but it will go for everyone, all the telecom providers. So I think there are deeper reasons behind why it is not happening.
Thank you very much, SRJ. I've indulged my panel member for far too long. I know your smart watches are now telling you to stand up, which we will do that now. They're all here. I think we have a break now, so you'll get an opportunity to talk to them if you have further questions or if they have something to add to it. But before I close, a big thank you to everyone for sitting along for 120 minutes or so out here. That's one. Second thing, This is a partnership which has proven that it can be done between the public and private entities bringing together. That's what ARISE is all about. ARISE at national level is to build that partnership, forge that partnership between public and private. And if it works, that has the potential to scale up. That's what the intent should be. There are other ARISE national networks here who have some similar experiences, may not be exactly in real estate, but other domains. And I think we together have a collective opportunity here to bring things up to the global scale and processes. So thank you again to the co-chair, the vice chair of ARISE, to all the colleagues who have been in this effort, and to colleagues who are also already invested in countries like Brazil, which have a huge potential and need behind it. Thank you very much.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have a good break. I hope you could make some new friends, colleagues, and share some information. So, to our participants online, thank you for the patience. We are going to resume the symposium with the last session. This is going to be a fireside chat on extreme heat. This session will look into the growing risk posed by extreme heat, its implications for public health and infrastructure, and the need for innovative solutions. So if I can invite you to please take a seat, and I will now call to our moderator. I'm delighted to introduce Ms. Farah Nas, Director of ESG and Innovation at AECOM, Middle East and Africa. Farah, the floor is yours.
Thank you for being with us after the tea break. So we are waiting for a really interesting conversation. I would like to invite on stage Kerry Hines and Dr. Jagan. So I'm an engineer, trained as an architect, and I work in the built environment space for the last 20 years and 10 years in Middle East. My work focuses on decarbonization of cities. I've done a lot of work, and I work for AECOM, which is one of the world's, one of the largest infrastructure companies. Just to give a bit of background, a lot of our work that we do here are based on infrastructure and built environment, and my focus is specifically on net zero transition. So I wrote a book called Net Zero Cities and also Mission Zero, very focused on Middle East work. Today I'm really excited to have these two amazing guests. We are going to explore a bit in depth of UAE and Barbados synchronicities and lessons learned on resilience and climate funding. So I would start by first, Kerry, if you would be kind to introduce yourself, please.
Good afternoon to everyone. It definitely is a pleasure to be here. My name is Kerry Hines. I'm the director of the Department of Emergency Management. That's the National Disaster Management Agency in Barbados. I've held this post since 2015, and it really is a role which you have to take very seriously. You convene a number of stakeholders to discuss and to respond and manage the various hazards that may impact Barbados on a daily basis.
So that's your day-to-day job?
Yes.
For the last, how many years you've been?
Well, I've been a part of the agency since 2001, but in this leadership role, it has been since 2015.
Thank you so much, Kerry. Dr. Jagan, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jagan Nathan. I'm the Senior General Manager of Sustainability at Shoba Group. And for those who do not know about Shoba, it is one of the leading real estate developers in the region with a unique backward integrated model which other companies do not have the luxury of. By that, I mean all key ecosystems within the built environment or development are part of Shoba. So we have an architectural and in-house design practice of more than 500 people working on MEP design, structural, architectural of all Shobha projects. We have Shobha construction of more than 20,000 people involved in constructing Shobha's developments. We have Shobha's community management, looking after the community aspects of the built handed over properties. We have Shobha facility management, Shobha modular, Shobha furniture. So pretty much the whole ecosystem is within Shobha. That gives us enormous latitude in deriving the best of quality consistently and across sustainability as well. And on my role as head of sustainability, my job is to make sure at the strategic end as well as the low-hanging fruits end that all developments are nudging towards climate action. It has partly mitigation and part of adaptation as well. We have also tied up strategically with the Ministry of Climate Change to support them, UAE, to support them with their Net Zero by 2050 strategic initiative. That's a brief about myself. I'm looking forward to a good conversation, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dr. Jagan. So we know that cities consume 3% of global land and responsible for 80% of global greenhouse gas emission. And we heard today roughly that $1 spent on resilience brings back $8. We also know globally that we are building a city the size of Paris every single week. So I think it brings about this challenge of climate resilience. And recently, the April floods, those who were here in Middle East saw the effects of the flood, as well as in Spain, China, and other parts of UAE. We had tremendous weather conditions. So, Carrie, I would like to bring this context to a question to yourself. In your role within the climate resiliency of Barbados, could you please walk us through what does the climate resiliency plan of Barbados, the program, looks like, and what are the key lessons learned that has been implemented quite successfully?
Thank you for the question. Barbados's climate, we have a national climate resilience program. And what that means, it is a national good, and we have a common commitment, all stakeholders, and this is led by the government of Barbados to engender a sustainable and resilient developed Barbados. We are a small island developing state, and we are susceptible to a myriad of hazards, and the climate risk is one that is very high on the agenda. We are located in a hurricane belt, so for 6 months of the year, we can be hit by a potential hurricane or hydrometeorological event. And the most recent event that would have impacted Barbados was Hurricane Beryl in July of this year. And this brought an impact in terms of, it impacted our tourism industry, and it impacted our fishery sector. So what does that mean? Because of the vulnerability of Barbados, we felt that there was a need to have this program, a homegrown program that really catered to our vulnerabilities, but also looked to improve our resilience to these climatic risks. This means a whole of government approach. This means public-private sector partnerships. This means engagement in terms of our civil society or the average person on the street. It means everybody working in tandem to reduce our vulnerability to these hazards. And it is packaged in a number of areas, in a number of programs. You would hear us speak about the Roof to Reef program, which looks at climate resilient shelter, homes. It it means looking at water, energy, so the systemic, the things that our communities and our systems, our society is built on, we're looking to ensure that we have resilient infrastructure and resilient systems. We look at how we can improve in terms of waste management, because you know, when everything, when you introduce the water, the energy dynamic, you introduce the human element of it, and all the various things, we create waste. So how do we make those structures resilient? Now and how do we make our coastal environment, and that's where the reef comes in. So our climate resilience program is really about ensuring that resilience from roof to reef and everything in between. Now, my department, the Department of Emergency Management, we focus on the emergency management or disaster risk management program. And one of our key roles is to convene the various stakeholders to discuss these issues, and as well to really put plans in place, like our response plans, our mitigation plans, our recovery plans. Because you find that we talk about climate resilience, we're tested when the hurricane comes. We're tested when you have the very extreme temperatures. We're tested when we have the COVID. It shows us the vulnerabilities in the system. And while we should have various structures in place in what we call blue sky times, normal times, we also need to plan for the extreme cases that may impact on us.
So can I ask a question? What makes these programs acceptable by the people? Like what did Barbados government did that made it more relatable to people for them to show up and accept it and do something?
I think the key thing is impact. The various hazards that may affect Barbados, it doesn't spare anyone. It doesn't say, well, you have to be living at this particular location, or you have to have this particular characteristic about you. It impacts everyone. And the various hazards that have impacted us over the years, and I say more recently, in 2021, we were within the COVID pandemic. It impacted the public sector, private sector communities. Then there was a volcanic eruption in St. Vincent, or one of the neighboring islands, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. While we were in COVID, we were impacted by ashfall that closed our airport for 10 days. It basically ground our society and our economy to a halt for a while. Then fast forward to June, we had what we call the freak storm, lightning strikes, and in July of that year, we had Hurricane Elsa. So you understand the complex environment that we have to operate in, and because it didn't spare one group as opposed to the other, impacted all, persons understood, okay, we need to ensure that we have something in place to deal with these occurrences. And in Barbados as well, we have a very good public-private sector, and I would say public participation system. And we have a system where a government will convene the various players. Then we also have what we call call-in programs. So the public gets to say what are their opinions about something, and in a respectful way, but it is, you have frank discussions about how we can create a more resilient Barbados, and the role of each and every person in that particular dynamic.
That's brilliant to understand, because I think knowledge and awareness and how people take ownership, that's so, that is the key. So, Dr. Jagan, I'm going to move on to you now. From a real estate development perspective, you've seen what happened in April and you have seen what happened globally. So, what is your view? Like, what is Shobha Realty doing from a developer perspective? And what are the steps do you think are actionable in terms of this urban heat, this big climate challenge that we're facing?
Thanks for the question. Before I formulate an answer for that, I would like to look into the global aspect as well. Fortunately or unfortunately, in many of the climate, I was just having this talk over the break. When we talk of climate action and specifically to various sectors, including built environment, there seems to be an probably obsession would not be the right word, or more of an interest towards net zero or mitigation. We talk of net zero of power sector, transportation sector, shipping, aviation, built environment. So my view personally is that no matter what mitigation you do, eventually there is going to be a residual leftover of something. It may be a permanent increase in temperature, permanent increase in peak summer, increase in number of peak summers, and the intensity, scale and the frequency of climate events are going to be much different from what we had. So that is where all sectors should be prepared to adapt to those eventuality. That's called, and how fast we can determines the resilience. So coming back to Shobha Realty, it is the leadership very strongly believes that if we have to grow at a pace at which the buildings are being designed and developed, the only way to grow is by being sustainable. That's a general moral understanding. So we have developed over millions of square feet of assets. As I speak, we are about 40 million square feet in construction and 20 million square feet in design. So they are all across various master plans. By default, the master plans of Shobha development have 50% open area. I am referring to the adaptation or resilience or the microclimate things that would make it easier for communities, the residents to pass by and live and stay in those communities. The master plan department looks at shading analysis, wind patterns, and strategically locate sky terraces and gardens along those lines to reduce the temperature. We have roof gardens, sky terraces to about 50% of the building footprint within the master plan. We have adapted or native trees of very high density, about 12 meters squared per capita per person, 25% higher than World Health Organization standards of 9 square meter per person. We have water features that are going to be again located that helps in reducing the temperature and creating a lively environment for the residents. These are some of the and about 25 to 30% of all master plans are with gardens and parks. That is at the master plan level, and the resilience or the adaptive measures spread to the buildings as well. So all are, of course, at the end of the day, the community should be livable, the facilities should be workable with those extreme conditions. So the electromechanical equipments are all designed for much higher temperature, and they will continue to deliver as the summer temperatures peak. Having said that, the design team also is working at adiabatic cooling, so that the high temperature at which those equipment have to perform are brought down by the simple adiabatic cooling process, not only for new buildings, but they are slowly systematically being done for the roof of the existing buildings as well. And we have district cooling to take care of air conditioning resilience. So these are the things at the master plan and at the design level. Going beyond electromechanical, let us go to the design of buildings is building materials, innovative materials such as cool roofs to reflect more of the heat and absorb less of them, materials with high solar refractive index for the hardscapes. These are integrated into the design. So I would say that, and again, to be honest, these were not actually, these are design philosophies. So if you think back, a lot of things that we are currently discussing now, be it adaptation or conservation, they're all best practices which at some point of time have been there existing all along within communities. Resilience to withstand a disaster. But with a lot of growth, we are forced to use this under this term and then factor it within our risk management or design philosophy.
So many of the things you mentioned are over and above the UAE regulations. So as a developer, how are you managing that balance of business case of doing more good than rather doing less bad?
To that question, I should say I'm lucky to be working with Shobha Realty, because I know for sure, 100%, that it comes from the leadership. Mr. PNC Menon is a person, pro-society person, and just he has already pledged 50% of his wealth to charity. So he is a person who believes in sustainability, and that leadership commitment, conviction, responsibility and accountability finds its way all the way at operational level. So our designs are basically, it has obviously, if you're going to focus on those and develop high quality buildings, at some point it is going to have an impact back to the business. Why are some developers respected for high quality or resilient buildings? How come, why are some developers having the credibility or known for the integrity? So it comes back. But to your question, it is design philosophy which we integrate, and our buildings are sold, but at the same time the instruction comes to us that it should be green, it should be certified, it should have the features that I just discussed. So it starts much before at the master plan. So it has become part of it's not that we design for resilience. Our designs are naturally resilient. That's the way I would like to put it.
So bringing back this people factor resiliency, Kerry, I'm going to come to you to understand. You mentioned about the programs and different programs and how it intervenes different communities. So can you give us a case study where you can talk us through like something that really worked, and as a government you learned, and maybe something that you didn't work but there was still so much learning from it? Because I think as a society we're obsessed with success, but we learn a lot from failures and what doesn't work, because then we know how to optimize it. So can you just walk us through an example like that?
I think there's so many examples. When it comes to climate resilience, one of the key examples that we have is building resilient housing. And as a government, we have seen the thrust towards that. And why I say that is because every year, 6 months of the year, there's a hurricane season. And every year we have, or at some point, it does not even have to be a hurricane. It could be a severe hydrometeorological event. It could be flooding, what's not. And we saw the impacts of that in terms of disruption to the community, disruption, impact on our housing stock. And what we said we would look to do is to construct more climate resilient housing. And that means encouraging persons to have the hurricane straps, building with more resilient materials, even placing and it is not a one-off thing. We look at the pitch of the roof, and we also included in there our renewable energy in terms of the solar panels. So just in terms of pulling together all the issues that we have and putting them into practical solutions that will assist persons in weathering the storm, if I may. In terms of, no, we started those as pilot projects, and as you see them go, there may be certain things that you have to tease out because you would not have done it as good this time, and then when the next system comes, we see certain issues, see little things that we need to tweak and change. And so it is a continuous learning. The idea is that we get better as a system and as a country. Even in terms of looking at just in July when Hurricane Beryl affected, say, our coastline, we had some resilient structures in terms of the groins and our seawalls, the coastal infrastructure that was going to protect our various coasts. Now, when Hurricane Beryl impacted us in July, some of those features were overtopped. So we now have to go back to the drawing board and look to construct so that it can withstand even greater events. So that was a learning for us, and we are in the process of trying now to implement better structures to really secure our course.
So thank you for sharing that. So how are the pilot case studies that worked or didn't work? How is it scaled? Is it through policy or incentivization? Like, what makes it scalable across Barbados from your pilot case studies to 100 projects adopting that solution?
It is ingrained in our policy.
Okay.
Our policy to be 100% renewable, using renewable energy by 2035. It is our policies to be a more disaster resilient country by 2030. So we have a commitment, a national commitment to seeing ourselves advance. And by exposing this and with the leadership that we have leadership at all levels. You will see our Prime Minister, the Honorable Mia Mottley, a global player. She's on the global stage and she advocates for the climate resilience and ensuring that we are more resilient, not just as Barbados or not just as small island developing states, but as a globe. Because at the end of the day, it is about people, and we don't want to leave people behind. It's about our ecosystems, ensuring that they are very resilient. Now, what we have done, we started out with pilot projects, and then we're looking to scale them up. Just a couple of days ago in Azerbaijan, Barbados revealed its Barbados investment plan. So now for us, this is another step in the climate resilience programming, seeing how we can scale up after you've seen the successes at that scale, how we can scale up. And we need to do it not just the private, not just government, but with private sector, and not just the private sector in Barbados. You're seeing now that we are in a globalized world, and we need to share our resources as countries and as stakeholders. And this is where now we scale up. So it is really a political commitment to the people of our countries that we need to ensure that we are truly resilient as ecosystems and as societies.
Thank you for sharing that. So Dr. Jagan, I'm going to come to you now. We discussed about developer perspective and city perspective. So from your point of view, what proactive steps could a city official or private sector can take to move to start creating this dynamics? Because there's policies, there's a lot of cases. So what do you think, from your perspective, that could be done, especially in this part of the world?
Thank you. Let me start at the city level first. To be prepared, I think the fundamental basic step is to undertake a comprehensive climate risk analysis to identify the pinpoints of what specific climate threats that city is going to be exposed to. In case you have already done that, the next step is to carry out a risk resilience review. So you must have certainly read about risk review, resilience review carried out by London to understand how exactly the preparedness of the city is, and they had come out with some recommendations on carrying out emergency drills and things like that. So that will be the first point, and then based on those, they have to move to the governance at the city level. You would also come across the current times, a lot of places, a lot of cities appointing chief heat officers, which are not a very common one, but these officers' idea is to understand the heat stress across the cities, and moving on from there, again on the governance, you have to look at putting the policies and regulations. So those regulations might be resilience policies or specific green building policies targeting cool materials or cool roofs and associated things which would look at the heat part. Now if we are going to talk of rainfall, now we are experiencing rains which are quite incessant or untimely or of heavy intensity. We are now part of the regulation calls for sponginess into the surfaces to absorb rainwater. So and other thing is, as cities, they should, it was also discussed in the morning, resilience in one is now cascaded to resilience on various other sectors. If there is a shortage of water, that's going to impact power sector. Power sector is going to impact transportation, and power sector is also going to impact IT. So these are the cascaded effects of those specific parameter should be reviewed by city officials. So that's the most important thing I would say on the city side. When it comes to businesses, business should accept and understand the fact that climate risk is a business risk. So based on that, they have to make sure that their developments are well prepared for any sort of climate eventuality. So they should factor in all those within they should carry out a risk assessment and factor in all those within their enterprise risk management and make provisions for internalizing those risks into their building developments. I think that would be the basic thing that a business should do in order to make sure that their developments are protected against. That's good for their business, good for the community, and that's the least they could do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think globally, 1,000 cities have signed up for net zero transitions and climate resiliency, I think. And latest data shows the net zero stock take record that only 60 cities have these kind of climate resiliency built into their system of decarbonization. Carrie, from your perspective, if you would leave us with 3 advices of what city officials can do. Dr. Jagan mentioned from a developer perspective, but from your perspective for other cities to become more climate resilient, what would these 3 top things would be? I know we discussed about policy, that's a key driver, but I recall when we were discussing, you mentioned some other very important points. So what would be your 3 key points for any city officials to drive this transformational change in a more actionable way?
I think the first one would be partnership and collaboration. You need to bring the players to the table, the vested partners in this whole resilience paradigm to the table. Understand that there is no one stakeholder that has all the resources available to them. So you need to have that conversation, and you need to have someone convening that conversation and being a champion of that conversation. And that leads me to the point of champions. You need to identify a champion in every single sphere, in every single sector, in every single city. So you may have a champion from the government's perspective. You may have a champion from the agency perspective. You need to have a champion as it relates to the city's perspective on these issues. And you need, and for us in the Caribbean and more so in Barbados, we found the need to include the younger persons. Remember, we may be the leaders now, but they're the future leaders. And you have to ensure that you have as many diverse voices as possible. There must be inclusivity in the process. So the partnership and collaboration, the champions, and also ensuring and always looking for opportunities to make the system as agile as possible. Things will happen, things will go wrong, but the idea is to keep going. And where there are opportunities to scale up, you find those opportunities. I know we said 3, but the very, I think there's a 4th one in terms of the importance of resource mobilization. And when you're doing something, you may think that you may be the innovator, but it has happened somewhere else. And the ability for you to connect and collaborate with other persons may be far-flung from you, but knowing that there are resources out there that you can mobilize to support your efforts. They could be financial, technical, what's not, but there are resources that may be available to you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Does anybody have any questions from the audience? No, I think. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think that was really brilliant to understand from your perspective what good looks like. And Dr. Jagan, thank you for sharing your perspective. I will ask you one last question, Dr. Jagan. Kerry shared the 3 top golden advice, I would say. What would be, from your perspective? I know you talked about a systems thinking approach, but if you were had 3 points to put forward, what would that look like?
Yeah, thank you. As a developer, I would say that the first point is to understand that climate change is reality, and your business should be committed to being resilient in terms of whatever you are in the business of. Say, it's a built environment, it has to be built resilient. That's one. And second, having come to that understanding that you are responsible and accountable for that, you have to include that as a part of your risk management and find ways of understanding the pinpoints and internalizing those into your development. So as I said, the heat or the storm, for example, in one of our master plans, we undertook 100-year flood studies, and then our properties are going to be built 4 meters above that. Sort of a resilience that we try to factor in. And the third point is to make sure that those internalized things are well fed in through the design and development, and finding ways of achieving that. So these are 3 things I would say are important from the developer perspective, and from the city's perspective we already discussed that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So just to summarize today's session, thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge. Essentially, proactive actions is really required, and I know you all agree on that. That's why you're all still here in this room. But also doing, instead of doing less bad, doing more good. And I think that becomes most conversation of investments and business case, because many times we know what bad looks like, and then value engineering conversation comes, and all the good ideas kind of gets goes out of the window. So I think the conversation we are having here is really understanding what is the business case of climate resiliency, having those internal conversations, and really identifying what's the systems thinking approach, because the way we used to be doing business as usual is changing. The whole narrative is shifting, and I think we all have to get comfortable having those uncomfortable conversations from a private sector and public sector. I have it every day, so I know how uncomfortable it is. And lastly, having a clear definition of what good looks like. Innovation might need different thing to different people. Climate resiliency might mean different, and I think today a point was raised about contextualizing the climate resiliency, because in this part of the world, I know heat, we're talking a lot about heat, but if you look at the NASA data, climate data of 2050, 2070, in this part of the world, storms and cyclones and rain events are becoming a big conversation. We never used to design for rainwater management, and now most of the developers are focusing on rainwater management. You have a point? Yes. So we can see the shift of conversation. 10 years ago, we couldn't even talk about accreditation, sustainability accreditations, because everybody thought it's going to cost 10% more. And now sustainability accreditation is just a baseline, and the conversation is how do we become net positive. From an infrastructure perspective, I think you touched on a lot of good points, but nature positive infrastructure has been a really, really important. And what we're seeing in this part is that nature risk assessment is becoming a big part of the conversation. So I would really welcome all of you to have these uncomfortable conversations and understand and have those business case analysis done, because the only way we can move the conversation is to create a business case analysis of what good really looks like and get everybody on board. I think one of the biggest thing I've found, and I'm sure you've noticed, is that the awareness raising, right? Knowledge and awareness raising, and that becomes a big conversation. So if we all take one actions that we're going to actively create awareness to people who doesn't know what good looks like, I think that would be a one big overcome, right? Do you have any other points?
That's the point I wanted to raise. In fact, awareness and collaboration partnership was touched a bit, right? So sustainability or resilience, unfortunately, is there's no competition in that. It's not that I supported 1 million people, you supported 500,000. It's not that way. So it's a field, it's a topic where we need to share the knowledge, and knowledge is power. So collaboration, partnership, and sharing of best practices makes a lot of difference than leaving everyone to experience and reinvent the wheel. Resilience, forwarded, considered early in the design, is much more beneficial socially, economically, than witnessing an event and doing the reparation works. Thanks.
Kerry, do you want to say anything?
I totally agree with that. At the end of the day, it is about equity as well, and leaving no one behind. You would find your neighboring business, they would have weathered the storm, or they would have dealt with a particular hazard well, and then there's someone else just next door to them that hasn't. We live in an ecosystem, and we depend on, whether we want to admit it or not, we depend on each other. And the idea is to ensure there's strength in unity, and we need to pull everyone along, because if we are to consider ourselves or our countries and our systems truly resilient, that means that everybody needs to be resilient.
Thank you. And I would like to push the industry by one more saying, let's push the boundary a little more, co-creation, because we really need to, because what I heard from what you were saying is it's collaborative process, but it's the co-creation of processes, efforts, and vision that then gets adopted, and we really need to humanize this transition. So thank you so much for being with us this evening. I know it's nearly 6 and you're going to hit the Dubai traffic, but thank you so much for being with us, and you can speak to our panelists at the end of the session. Thank you.
was fantastic. Thank you, Farah. It was such an in-depth conversation, and thank you to our distinguished panelists. So just to conclude, in the next 10 minutes, we have two final remarks from two esteemed leaders. First, we have Jagannathan Ramaswamy to please give us the final closing remarks, and then we have our very own Mr. Sujit Mohanty from UNDRR. So I'll invite Mr. Ramaswamy to give the final remarks. If you can, from here, thank you.
Good evening once again, and thanks for giving me this chance. So I would only revisit the conversation we had just now on how exactly the market has to be prepared for resilience as opposed to the common notion on net zero and mitigation. Very soon we have to accept that the residual climate that we are going to have is going to be much different. We are going to have much more incessant climate events, unpredictable, unreliable, of a different scale and intensity, and we have to be prepared for that. If there is in financial terms, when a business is too big to fail, banks step in as lenders of last resort. When it comes to climate, adaptation resilience is a lender of last resort for survival. So actions for adaptation resilience are non-negotiable. So the better, the sooner we understand that, internalize that and act on that, the better it is for the future. So with that brief remark, I'd like to thank you. Bye.
Mr. Ramaswamy, and thank you very much, colleagues. It was really an exciting conversation the whole day. I'm not going to stand between you and you living and hitting the Dubai roads. Before we leave, as you come to a closer, I think it was really exciting to see how private sector see these issues. We as United Nations, we have been discussing this with public sector, within governments, but how private sector really are looking at these issues it was evident that they have a lot of solutions. They want to collaborate. The private-public partnership was really evident in our previous panels. So it was really an exciting conversation. We would like to take it forward with the ARISE, and I must thank all the ARISE members, all the participants today for staying on until now, the board members of ARISE, the Private Sector Alliance of UNDRR, all the panelists and all our colleagues, even UNDRR colleagues from the regional office from Geneva. Really a big thanks to all of you for making this happen. And last but not the least, our host, UAE ARISE, as well as our Sobha Realty, Mr. Ramaswamy. It was big thanks again for all the support. So with that, let's conclude today's conversation, and then this is really a journey that is not ending here. We work with you, we collaborate with you, and we go on with that spirit. Thank you very much.
Recording stopped.